I am going to tell you everything, not because I expect anyone to hear this, not because the ships are coming. I stopped believing in the ships a long time ago, but because someone should know what happened on this island, and I am the only one left who can say it. And if I die without saying it, then it dies with me, and the world is left with nothing but a word carved into a tree and years of questions. My name is William Tylor. I was a carpenter from Bristol. I came to Roanoke Island in August of 1587 with 114 other Englishmen and women and children, and I watched everything that happened here from the first day to the last, and I'm going to tell you all of it, starting with the day the governor sailed away and left us. We arrived in August, 115 of us, crossing the Atlantic in 3 ships under a governor named John White, an artist, a map maker, a man who had been to this coast before and who spoke about the new world with the specific enthusiasm of someone who had seen it from a safe enough distance to find it romantic. This was the second English attempt to plant a colony on Roanoke Island. The first attempt, 2 years before, had failed. The men sent in 1585 had nearly starved, falling into violent conflict with the local tribes, and eventually abandoned the island entirely and sailed on with Francis Drake. What happened to their settlement when we arrived was a collection of damaged buildings and the smell of something that hadn't gone well. We were supposed to be the correction. Families this time, women, children, the kind of permanent presence that signals intention rather than extraction. We were not here to take what the land offered and leave. We were here to stay, to build the first permanent English settlement in the New World. The seed of something that would grow long after every person on those 3 ships was dead. That was the idea. I believed it when we left England. I believed it for approximately the first 3 weeks after we arrived. Then Governor White announced he was sailing back to England for supplies. You have to understand what that announcement did to 115 people standing on a beach at the edge of a continent nobody in England had ever properly mapped. We have been here 3 weeks. 3 weeks of building and planting and negotiating with the local Croatoan people through a man named Mantil, one of the few genuine bridges between our world and this one. A Croatoan man who had traveled to England twice and spoke enough of our language to make real communication possible. 3 weeks of learning which sounds from the forest at night were animals and which required a hand on a weapon. 3 weeks of realizing that everything we thought we knew about survival applied to England and almost nothing about England applied here. And now the governor was leaving. There were arguments. I was a carpenter. I was not in the room where the serious arguments happened. The arguments between White and the senior men of the colony about whether this was wise, whether a governor who abandoned his people 8 weeks after arrival deserved the title. But the shape of the disagreement reached everyone. It always does in a community that small. White's position was that we needed more supplies than we had. Food, gunpowders, tools. The margin between survival and catastrophe was thinner than anyone had calculated in England, and they needed to cross back and replenish it before winter arrived. He was probably right about the supplies. What he failed to calculate, what none of us calculated, standing on that beach, watching him give his final instructions, was how long he would actually be gone. 3 months, he said, maybe 4. He made one agreement with us before he sailed. If he had to leave the island for any reason, attack, starvation, any situation that forced us to abandon the settlement, we were to carve the name of our destination into a tree or the palisade post near the main gate. And if the departure was forced, if we were fleeing rather than choosing, we were to add a cross above the name so he would know the difference when he returned. The cross meant danger, No cross meant we chose. Then he got on the ship, and we stood on the beach and watched the sails disappear over the horizon. And for the first time since we had left England, I felt in the specific place below the chest where fear lives before it becomes thought that something had gone very wrong. The first winter we survived, not comfortably, but with the kind of margin that lets you stop thinking about the food situation for a single day. But we survived through rationing, through trade with the Croatoan people, through the particular stubbornness of people who have crossed an ocean and have nowhere to retreat to. Mantua was the reason we made it through the first winter. I want to be clear about this because the accounts that will be written in England, if any accounts are ever written, will probably minimize it or omit it entirely. The Croatoan people kept us alive, not from charity exactly, and not from obligation, but from the specific pragmatic kindness of people who understood that neighbors who starved became a different kind of problem than neighbors who hurt. Mantua moved between both worlds with a ease that I admired and never fully understood. He had been to England. He had seen what England was, its skill, its ambition, the specific quality of a civilization that had decided it had the right to plant itself wherever it chose. He had come back to his own people with that knowledge and made himself into something neither word had a category for. He translated not just language, but intent. He smoothed things that would otherwise have thorn. Without Mantua, we would not have seen spring. Spring came, we planted. It was the horizon for sales. Nothing. Summer arrived. We harvested what the ground gave us, which was less than what we had planted and less than what we needed. The soil on Roanoke Island was difficult, not impossible, but difficult in ways that our English farming knowledge had not prepared us for. Different drainage, different composition, different relationships between rain and yield that we were learning in real time at a cost we could not afford. We watched the horizon. Nothing. The second winter arrived, and it was different from the first, not just in severity, though it was colder, darker, longer, different in what it did to us, to the way we sat together in the evenings and talked about England and tried to remember what normal life felt like, to the way certain conversations stopped happening because everyone already knew what was in them and nobody had the energy to have them again. The explanations for White's absence had exhausted themselves by midwinter. First, the crossing had taken longer than expected. Then there had been delays procuring the supplies, then storms. Then this one I heard more than once from people who needed it to be true. Perhaps the ships had come and we had somehow missed them. Perhaps they had arrived at a different part of the coast. Perhaps there had been a misunderstanding about the exact location. Then the explanations stopped entirely. 18 months after White had sailed, no ships. And then the news had reached us through the Croatoan people, through the network of communication that ran along this coast in ways we were only beginning to understand, that England and Spain were at war, that the Spanish Armada had sailed, that every available English ship had been conscripted for the defense of the country. John White was not coming back in any time frame any of us had agreed to survive in. He was trying, I believe that. I have always believed he was trying. He was a man who had left his daughter on this island, his own daughter, Eleanor, and her husband, Ananias, and their newborn child, Eleanor Dare, the first English child born in the New World. And whatever his failures of judgment, I do not believe he abandoned us willingly. The ocean abandoned us. The war abandoned us. The distance between what he intended and what was able to do abandoned us. We were still left. The drought came in the second year and announced itself with a quiet that was somehow louder than weather. The streams that had run reliably through the first winter slowed in spring and thinned through summer, and by autumn were doing something I had no English word for. present but insufficient, running but giving almost nothing. The water level dropping week by week in a way that no amount of rain seemed to correct. The Croatoan people recognized it immediately. They had a word for it, a name for this specific pattern of sky and ground. The years when the rain returned itself and the earth hardened, and the crops that should have grown did not. Their grandparents had survived it. Their grandparents' grandparents had survived it. They survived it by understanding what it meant and responding to what it actually was, rather than what they hoped it would become. They came to Mantio. Mantio came to us. The message was clear enough without needing perfect translation. The drought was going to get worse before it got better. Roanoke Island was particularly exposed. The soil, the positioning, the way the island sat in relation to the water, and the wind made it more vulnerable than the mainland, more vulnerable than Croatoan Island, 50 miles to the south, where the Croatoan people lived. Come south, they said. Bring what you can carry. The land there is better. The drought eats less hard. And the relationship between our people, which Mantio had spent years building into something genuine, would hold better on their ground than ours. The meetings that followed were the most serious conversations I witnessed in 3 years on that island, because what the Croatoan were proposing was not a temporary shelter. It was not a retreat that preserved the idea of returning to Roanoke Island when conditions improved. It was an acknowledgement that we were not going to survive here, that the colony, the first permanent English settlement in the New World, the thing we had crossed the ocean to build, was over, that the question was not how to save it. The question was how to save ourselves. I want to tell you what those people were before I tell you what happened to them. Because history, if it remembers us at all, will remember us as a mystery, as a number, 115 people who vanished, as an absence, a puzzle, a carved word on a palisade post. It will not remember Eleanor White, the governor's own daughter, who gave birth to Virginia Dare on this island 6 days after we arrived. A baby who came into existence on a strange shore before her mother had even properly understood where she was. Eleanor, who was 25 years old and had left England with a husband and arrived in the New World with a daughter, and watched the sky for her father's ships through 2 winters without once saying it in my hearing that she had lost hope. It will not remember Ananias Dare, who was a tiler by trade and who built things on this island with a precision that made other craftsmen stop and watch, who argued loudest in the meetings for giving whites more time, who eventually, when the vote went the other way, simply accepted it and started helping plan the departure with the same precision he brought to everything. It will not remember the children, and there were children, a dozen of them at least, who had grown 2 years older on this island and who by the second winter had stopped flinching at the forest sounds and had begun learning words from the Croatoan children that none of the adults knew. These were the people, not a mystery, not an absence. People. Then the fever found me in October of the second year. Not ordinary fever. I had seen ordinary fever on the island. Everyone had. It moved through the settlement with a regularity that we had learned to manage. 3 days of heat and sweating and then recovery. Miserable, but survivable. This was not that. This came on a Tuesday morning with a violence that had no precedent in anything I had experienced. By Tuesday evening, I could not stand. By Wednesday, I could not speak coherently. By Thursday, I was told later, much later, that the people sitting with me had stopped expecting me to survive the night. I remember almost nothing of those days. Fragments, lights that seemed wrong, voices I could not locate, the sensation of the ground beneath me as though it were moving, the smell of the highland at night, salt and pine, and something underneath both that I had never been able to name, and I still cannot name even now. the specific smell of a place that is not yours, but that has become the only place you know. I remember hands on my forehead. I remember someone saying my name. I do not remember them leaving. I woke up on a morning that I could not place in the calendar. The lights told me it was late in the year. The specific angle of it, low and thin, that meant autumn was ending. I lay still for a moment the way you lie still after serious illness, taking inventory of what remained. I was in my own shelter, my own blanket, my belongings around me in the order that I kept them. But the settlement was quiet in a way that settlements are not quiet when 114 people are living in them. I stood. Slowly, the ground did something unsteady and I waited for it to stop. Then I walked to the door and looked out. Nothing. Not the nothing of early morning before people are awake. The nothing of absence. The fire pit cold. The pathways between the buildings undisturbed. The quality of air that a place has when no one has moved through it in days. I walked to the center of the settlement. I walked to every building. I walked to the palisade gate and stood there and looked at the post. Croatoan, carved cleanly, deep enough to last, recent enough that the wood inside the court was still pale. I stood at that gate for a long time. Croatoan was the name of Mantios people, the highland where they lived, 50 miles south, the closest thing we had to allies on this coast. They had gone to Croatoan. That was the message. That was exactly what White had asked for. The destination, no cross, meaning the departure was chosen rather than forced. They had done everything correctly. They had left the message precisely as agreed. They had left without me. I want to be fair to them. I have had a long time alone to think about this, and I have moved through anger and something close to hatred, and something that is not quite forgiveness, but is adjacent to it. And where I have arrived is this: the belief I was dying. 3 days of the kind of fever I had, in this place with no medicine, and no physician, and no resource beyond the limited knowledge of people who were themselves surviving on insufficient food. 3 days of that, and the people watching you stop expecting you to survive. The departure was not impulsive. The meetings had been happening for weeks. The decision had been made before I fell sick. The timing was fixed by factors that could not be adjusted for one man who appeared to be already gone. I believe Eleanor Dare sat with me. I believe the man who came and looked at me and made an assessment based on everything he knew about fever and bodies and the specific trajectory of what he was observing. I believe they left because they had to, and because they thought they were leaving a man who was already lost. I am not dead. I was simply not dead. At least not yet. What came next was simple in theory. Croatoan Island was 50 miles south. I had no boat capable of that crossing alone. I had the coast. I had my legs, which were weaker than they had ever been, but were legs, which was more than I had expected to have. I would walk south along the coast and I would find them. That was the plan. I want to be honest about what the walking was. It was not heroic. It was not a determined march of a man who has decided to survive. It was the movement of a body that had not yet received the instruction to stop, following the course that gave nothing away, through a landscape that was beautiful in the specific indifferent way of places that do not know you are there and would not adjust themselves if they did. Some days were better than others. The food I had carried ran out faster than I had planned. The coast provided what it provided: shellfish when the tide was right, fresh water where streams met the sea. The occasional thing that my 2 years on this island had taught me was safe to eat, and which I ate without pleasure and with complete attention. I thought about England. I thought about Bristol and the smell of the harbour, and the sound the city made in the morning before the day had fully started. A sound I had stopped being able to hear clearly in my memory and that I chased through the walking the way you chase something almost remembered. I thought about the settlement, about Eleanor's face watching the horizon, about the sound of Virginia Dare crying in the night, the first English baby on this continent, crying the way babies cry everywhere with no knowledge of where they are or what it means. I thought about the word on the palisade post, carved cleanly, deep enough to last, by someone who did not know I was going to wake up and read them. I did not find them. I want to be plain about this. I do not know what happened to the 114 people who left Roanoke Island without me. I do not know if they reached the Croatoan Island. I do not know if the Croatoan people received them as they had offered. I do not know if Eleanor Dare and her daughter, Virginia, are alive somewhere on this coast. 2 years older, learning a new language, building something that has no English name yet. I hope they are. I hope Ananias has built something on Croatoan Island with his precise craftsman's hand that made the people around him stop and watch. I hope the children who had stopped flinching at the forest sounds found new sounds to stop flinching at. I hope Matthew found a version of himself that did not have to translate constantly, that would simply be one thing in one place without carrying two worlds simultaneously. I hope Virginia Dare is alive. That would mean something. I do not know if it is true. I'm writing this on the back because it is what I have. I am somewhere on the coast south of Roanoke Island, near a stream that had been reliable for the 3 days I have been stopped here. I am stopped because my legs have made a decision my mind has not fully ratified yet, which is that this is far enough. The fever did not kill me when it should have. The walking has been finishing what the fever started, slowly, with the thoroughness of things that do not hurry because they do not need to. John White came back in August of 1590. I know this not because I was there, but because I have calculated it. I've had long enough alone to understand that the war with Spain was the reason for the delay, that the Spanish Armada consumed every ship in 1588, that a man trying to cross the Atlantic to resupply a colony had no ships to cross and I would have had to wait until the war resolved itself. 3 years. It was gone for 3 years. You will have found the settlement empty. You will have found the word on the palisade. You will have tried to reach Croatoan Island and have turned back by the weather. I know this coast well enough to believe it. And you will have sailed back to England without confirmation of what the word meant or where the people were. He will spend the rest of his life not knowing. His daughter, his granddaughter, not knowing. I feel sorry for that. 115 people crossed an ocean. Some of them built houses that still stand empty on Roanoke Island. One of them gave birth to the first English child in this new world. All of them made a decision together in the face of something impossible and worked toward what they chose instead of waiting for what wasn't coming. One of them woke up too late, walked as far as he could, stopped here at this stream in this light. My name is William Tylor. I was a carpenter. I was there for all of it, and I'm the only one who knows the full story, and I'm leaving it here on this back beside the stream in the hope that the world is still the kind of place where things left behind streams I eventually found. The ships did not come. We did not vanish. We just stopped waiting before they arrived, and I stopped a little sooner than the rest.